So, Mike, thank you so much for joining. First of all, I think it's been almost 9, 10 years, maybe 8 years or so when we last met. I think I met you last time in London when I was
Yep.
there for one of the change programs. And I think Amit and me kind of doing it with two folds. I think what was happening was after I left Fidelity, a lot of people were reaching out for kind of mentorship, like a lot of young kids who want to pursue career in asset management or technology within IM world. And Amit had been mentoring a lot of those, folks as well. So we thought we just run a few sessions, see whether, people benefit from that. So we ran a bunch of sessions on that one. And then during those conversations, as I was saying before this started, was that, we kind of every time we meet, we talk about few people who've kind of inspired us most. So you happen to be one of them. We'll talk about Adam a lot. We'll talk about Babu a lot. So we thought maybe, it's as a gesture, as a gratitude, letting you guys know that we really appreciate, what we've learned from you. We thought maybe we'll reach out to you guys and maybe have a conversation. Not necessarily we have to revolve around asset management. It could be anything, to be honest.
Sure.
That was broad premise of the conversation. And
No, I'm very happy to help. It's a good idea rather than having the same conversations over and over with people just to get something recorded.
and you were there in India last year in Dharamshala. Uh,
Yes, yes, a group of us went to watch the test match, which sadly didn't last very long, but luckily it was a beautiful town and we did some hiking in the Himalayas, so we managed to keep ourselves busy.
did you go to Trihund? Was it the track I saw? I think Prasad sent me pictures from social media somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that happens to be my hometown. So when I
Oh
looked at
wow, okay. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. We had a really fun time, even if the cricket wasn't that good.
was that what March, April? What
It
time
was
of the year?
March. It was March, yeah. So it
Right.
wasn't.
Almost been a year.
Yeah, almost a year.
Yeah, I think Gerard was also with you, right? Yes.
He was, yeah, yeah, he was, yeah.
Yeah.
No, we had a fun time. It was nice. It was nice to be back in India, and yeah, we were in Delhi at the beginning and the end of the trip, so not long enough to really catch up with people. But it was nice to be in Delhi again.
And do you travel often, or was it like one-off things that
Oh, we
you?
try and go somewhere once a year if we can. We try and do a trip to a test match. That was the first time we'd been for a few years, just because of COVID and a few other complications. But
Yeah.
we're hoping to get out to Australia for the Ashes. Different people going for different parts of the tour. But yeah, I think my youngest son, will be playing out in Melbourne in the winter. So we're going to go out and see him and watch some cricket and hope that we can watch it without having to put our hands in our heads in our hands the way England are playing. But the only way is up.
So you switched somewhere around what 7 years back from this sort of corporate world to the cricket world.
Yes.
So how did that come about? Was that like something you were planning for long, or was it like more like right time to change kind of a moment?
It was probably something that I've been sort of mulling over in the back of my mind without necessarily even being that aware of it. I mean, I don't know whether you can cast your mind back to sort of 2017, 2018. We were going through a tremendous amount of change, and obviously, large organizations are always undergoing change, but there seemed to be even more than usual at that time. And, some of it I was finding more difficult than I normally did. I think maybe it's because I didn't really buy into some of it. And though I did have options to sort of move sideways and do some different things, the combination of me being sort of less comfortable in that role and probably feeling like I'd run out of energy a little bit. And then in parallel with that, my two sons were kind of, I guess they would have been about 12 and 10. They were starting to get into cricket in quite a big way. And they were doing quite a lot of work with a local coaching company. And I got to know the guys. And so it just started to occur to me that having dealing with a small company like that, you realise quite quickly whether they're well organised administratively. And whilst they were very good at coaching, they were terrible administratively. So I thought, well, I can probably help a bit here. So that was the thought process, really. It was probably the right time for me to step aside, having been at Fidelity for 31 years. And I had something that I thought I could step into. So it was because some people struggle with that. They get to the point where they want to move, but they don't necessarily have a clear idea of what they want to do next. So I was lucky, really. I just thought I'll give it a go, and what's the worst thing that can happen?
So you do actual coaching as well, or are you just saying the administrative part?
So I do less coaching. I coached quite a bit when I first joined, and I still coach from time to time now. I tend to do more sort of match management. I manage teams, take teams on tours and things like that. I don't do as much day-to-day coaching. We've got lots of coaches that are way better than me. So I spend most of my time doing the sort of back office side of things, making sure that everybody gets paid and every venue gets booked, that all of our fixtures are organised and that we've got teams available to fulfil the fixtures. So a lot of things sort of behind the scenes, that's the role that I'm playing, and I enjoy that.
And are these like, are you coaching like, is this like youth primarily, or is this like amateur? Or
Yeah,
it's like a mix of,
age 10 to 16,
wow.
within the coaching company.
So do they call it alphas,
Also,
Uh, Gen alphas and Gen Zs? Is that what it is?
yes, yeah.
What is it like? Does it make a lot of difference? I mean, what's the experience like when you're dealing with like, you know, almost going from dealing with people in their 40s, 50s to like going with somebody who's,
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a good question. It took me a while to get used to it because there are. Do you both have your own children?
yes,
Yeah.
my daughter is in 12th grade now, so she's around 16.
Okay.
Amit is,
And I mean,
Yeah, mine just started college, so
yeah, okay.
maybe so, yeah.
So you kind of you have a view on it from your own experience as a parent, and obviously you get to know your children. You kind of know what they respond to and what they don't respond to. When you're dealing with a group of 20 or 30 at any given time, yeah, you have to do it differently. You have to over time figure out what makes them tick. But yeah, but there are times when you're just in kind of crisis management mode, just trying to make sure that nobody gets hurt. Um, but it's the motivational things with something like sport. The children just want to play. They just want to hit as many
Yeah.
balls as they can, bowl as many balls as they can. So I think if you're keeping them active and interested, then it all tends to run pretty well. It's more difficult if you want them to sit down and listen. But I guess we were probably all the same when we were that age.
But how is it different from, say, you need you used to deal with traders and fund managers, and now managing kids, it might be a very different
That's I can
environment.
think of a number of answers to that question, but I think it's different in that I guess the fund managers and the traders, we were kind of providing a support service to them. I think coaching is a little bit different. As I said, you're mostly facilitating fun. That's probably the key thing. We obviously have players who are very good, who have got a chance of making a career out of the game, but 90% of the children we coach just play the game because they love it. And so, it's largely frictionless, really. You've just got to set things up properly, make sure you're organized and keep them busy, um, and everyone's happy. So they're not as demanding um, as your average sort of trader or fund manager would be, because the consequences, I guess, are just very different.
Hmm,
Mm.
yeah. Is there much use of technology in coaching as well? I mean, do you use like data and stuff like that for this, tracking performance matrices, or whether this is like scenario-based trainings and using simulations or stuff
So
like
at the
that?
top end, the boys and girls who are taking it very seriously and have got a chance of being professional, yeah, there's definitely all sorts of data and technology involved in coaching, whether it be video analysis tools that we're using to kind of capture what they're doing in a net session, to be able to show them, this is where your head was, this is where your hands were, this is where your feet were, your general alignment. We use technology for things like that. And we're also starting to be able to help them a bit more with, if you're a batsman or a batter, these are your strong shots, so this is where you should be looking to hit the ball. These are your options if the ball is bowled in this sort of area. So yeah, I mean, not to the degree that you'd see in the pro game, and certainly not to the degree that you'd see on the television. But these tools are kind of making their way down into being affordable for coaching companies like us. So at the top end, I would say, yeah, the sort of best 10% of players, we would use a lot of tech. For the company as a whole, we tend to just use technology for things like bookings,
Hmm.
um, making sure that we're managing our sort of calendar of activities, and things like, using QuickBooks for your finances and things like that.
I'm also always wondered whether, this whole idea around this using tactical insights during the games, is that like really a thing that's like matters, like, the change in the field setting in real time, or, changing the order of bowling and things. How big is that from a coaching perspective?
I think it's big in the shorter the format, probably the more important it is. Um, so I think when I watch franchise cricket, and that's not my favorite thing, I've kind of learnt to love it because there's so much of it, and obviously it's the way cricket's heading. I'm still very much a Test cricket fan at heart, although obviously we are a dying breed. Um, in short format cricket, if you get something wrong for two or three balls, it can have a massive impact on the game. If all of a sudden you go for three sixes, because the bowler hasn't followed the plan that you've set the field for, or the fielder hasn't, gone where he was supposed to go. It's hard to recover those situations in a short form game. Whereas in Test cricket, it kind of ebbs and flows over a longer period. So it's perhaps, you're thinking about a 10 over strategy, whereas in T20 cricket and 100 ball cricket, you're thinking about, the next two or three balls.
Is there a trajectory like one day there would be like only, match with like, God knows, 20 balls or something? I mean, it seems to be
It,
getting.
it, it could happen, but I mean, I just don't see what we're achieving if we go there. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the questions that you put to me earlier was about the sort of life lessons from cricket, and I think, I mean, my generation is certainly in the minority now. I mean, I'm hoping and praying that, at some point, the world will speed up so much that the the future generations think, well, there must be more to life than this. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's a question that people ask themselves all the time, but um, surely if you enjoy something, the longer you can enjoy it for, the better. So, if a game of cricket is intriguing for 2 hours, shouldn't it be more intriguing for 2 days? And it's not always the case, I know that, but I'm hopeful that at some point we'll get to the point where things have been dumbed down so far that people start thinking more deeply about them again, and perhaps um, taking a bit more time over things. But I don't know whether that'll happen.
And in coaching is with artificial intelligence also coming. I know it's penetrating every other area, but I'm not sure if sport or cricket is the last area
Yeah,
which
not
is
not yet, but I don't think we can ever say never with AI, because it could make its way into, all aspects of life, I guess.
so we have a robotic coach instead of
Half of the team is
a human
humanoids.
coach.
Yeah,
Yeah. Maybe someday the
imagine
new
that.
format is half of the team is of humanoids.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe that's the new format.
Hopefully there'll be, if the objective, which I don't really agree with, if the objective is for there be less work for people to do, then you'd think that leisure activities like cricket would benefit from that, because people have to do something with their time. So we'll see how that pans out.
Yeah.
I
Do you
think people need to work personally, but
Yeah.
do you see a shift in the interest in the sort of next generation in terms of playing these outdoor games with more kind of, these video games, all of this addiction to phone and
Mm.
all?
it's a good question. I mean, our participation numbers are actually up.
Oh,
So
okay.
I think what's happening is that, my children spend more time than I would like playing on a desktop or a laptop or on their phone. But they still spend a lot of time playing football, cricket, whatever else, golf. I just think it's one of those things that maybe, and obviously we're not the same generation, but my generation, when we would have had nothing to do, um, these kids have got stuff to do all the time. So,
Hmm.
But
we spent a lot
one
of
thing
time.
at least I have observed in my son's generation and his cousins and all is, I mean, they stopped reading books and
Yeah.
newspapers and that stuff. I mean, So for him, newspaper doesn't exist. Every news is real-time news that comes on his phone
Yeah.
as a one-shot news, and books they practically left. I mean, it's all PDFs that they go through.
Yeah.
It's all PDFs and point. That is one change I've definitely seen. Although they still play sports,
Yeah.
the shift away from physical books to this whole online
Completely
real-time
agree.
stuff.
My two boys are quite proud that they've only ever read a book because they had to do it for school. They've never read a book because they chose to. And even then, I doubt whether they read the whole book. Um, whereas the hope is my daughter, who's 23, reads books all the time. You know, she's a habitual reader and she actually reads physical books, and a lot of her friends do. And whether that's a boy girl thing or whether it's because she's a few years older, I don't know. But you know, I don't think these things are die completely. But yeah, there's obviously people have just got more choice as to what they
Yeah.
how they spend their time.
Totally. And I think I can relate to what Amit was saying, the amount of chat GPT being used for doing school projects.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, they started sending these like additional, memos to the parents now. My daughter got one mentioning that these school projects, chat GPT and stuff like that shouldn't be used. So you need to watch for her.
yeah. Same here.
So, interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting. Uh, So, Mike, I think one of the things that, I started working with Amit and very closely started working with, operation side of it as well, even when I was in Fidelity. And one of the things that I kind of thought, uh, has the relationship between tech and ops changed over a period of time, or are they like, always kind on the other side of the, it's always that like this tug of the war. It's inevitable and it's always going to be like that. What's your take on that?
yeah. I think there's always a tension there, but it doesn't have to be an unhealthy tension. I think where I've seen it work well is where you've got people who really understand, even if not in the detail, but at least understand and support what each area are trying to accomplish. And if you've got enough people who um, can speak well about that and can train people well about that, then I think the groups, respect each other and can actually drive towards the same goals reasonably well. I think where you don't have that and people are almost deliberately sort of pitched against each other and you've got, one set of priorities over here and another set of priorities over here, then inevitably that's going to be a problem. But a lot of groups do function like that, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think, Mike, you led some of the biggest transformation programs in your career, which involve both technology, operations, and the investment, right? So what were your key learnings and how did you go about getting those people together? Like you said, a lot of different priorities, and especially in large transformation programs, how do you go about getting people together? Is that the real mantra of success or it's something else?
Yeah, I think it is. It's just a lot of hard work early on, I think. I mean, it probably helped me that I did work in both sides. And I saw other people who had experience of both sides because you were able to um, put yourself in the shoes of the other group and empathize with them. And I think anyone who can do that is automatically going to get more people on board. Um, but you never get everyone on board. Um, and all you can do really is just work really hard at the start of a big program. And actually, I think with in some of the questions you asked me beforehand, I was obviously thinking a lot about the FMR and FIL separation program that we all worked on because that was such a massive effort and it
Yeah.
actually went pretty well. And I think one of the key success factors was the communication about what we were doing and why we were doing it and the benefits that would accrue from that. Even though some of it was just hard work and seemed like it was hard work for the sake of it, we managed to find a pretty good way of explaining to people how it could improve the organization. And the comms around that I thought was pretty good. And so, whilst not every, you won't get 100% of people on board, I think we probably had sort of 75, 80% buy in. People knew what they were doing and why they were doing it. And even if it affected them negatively, they had time to kind of consider that. And they were sitting in briefings and meetings and there was an engagement there. And I think if you try to shortcut that, then you'll pay the price throughout the whole project because people will either do things reluctantly or just not do them at all.
Mm. Yeah. Are you still in touch with any of the IAM folks? Are you completely drown on the other side of the.
No, I see a number of people who either live close by or I still play in a band occasionally, and so Rob Middleton, who works
Yeah.
on the fixed income side, Rob plays keyboards in the same band that I'm in, so I see Rob when we have rehearsals. Um, yeah, there's a number of people that we still get together, but there's obviously a whole load of other people that you might see for the first year after you leave, and then eventually you don't see very much at all.
Okay. So Mike, just so when you started your asset management career, I'm not sure if I remember you first told me you started somewhere in technology or desktop support.
I was in the
So,
data center
so how did
operation.
it pan out? You spent in operation, then investment, then as the chief operations officer. How was that whole journey like for you? And do you think is that a similar career people can have today as well who join the industry?
Well, I've often thought about that because it certainly wasn't planned. I was very young when I joined because I didn't really go to college, so I was 18, and I'd had some training at a different company on the IBM systems that Fidelity used, and that meant that I could come in and be an operator. And so I did that for a while, and then I thought, well, actually, those guys that are in tech support, or I can probably learn how to do that. And so I did that for a while, and then eventually got into some management positions. But I think every sort of 2 or 3 years, I got to the point where I thought, I've probably taken this as far as I can. And in an organization like Fidelity, it wasn't, it was a large organization, but it wasn't enormous. So you could kind of be in the same building as people that were doing product development or dealing or customer services. And so if you were inquisitive, you would say, well, that seems interesting because it's different to what I'm doing today. So can I go and do that? And it was the sort of company where if you showed an interest and you were willing to learn, you were quite often encouraged to make those kind of moves. And I made lots of them over the years. Some of them pre-planned, some of them reactive to organizational changes that took place. Yeah, but eventually I got to the point where I had seen quite a lot of different parts of the organization in action, um, which helped me massively in terms of being effective as a more senior leader because again I could kind of understand and empathize a little bit with what some of these other teams were dealing with because I'd worked in those teams. So I think it is possible, is the short answer, but you have to want to do it.
But in this world of where everybody wants to specialize in an area and get into depth, do you think how does that? So there's this whole debate of a generalist versus a specialist,
Yeah,
right? And nowadays, what I see, a lot of people want to get into a specialist area or just keep doing that. Do
yeah.
you think we still need that balance, or is more specialists now, or individual contributors that you start calling them?
Well, I think it's always a personal choice, really. I mean, some people are better suited to be specialists, particularly people who are more technically minded, I guess, and that they're potentially sort of happier dealing with the technical content than they are necessarily dealing with a diverse group of people potentially, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with. There isn't a right and a wrong answer. I don't think. I mean, good organisations need a good mix of both types of people. The one thing that I've always, well, I didn't always know this, but on reflection, we spent a lot of time. You guys as managers must have spent a lot of time dealing with people who are unhappy because either their salary wasn't growing as fast as they wanted it to, or their grade wasn't growing as fast as they wanted it to. And I used to say to people that you can't control any of that. So you're better off not worrying about it. What you can control is what you know and what you can do. So if you're always expanding what you know and what you can do, the chances are that good things will happen. And if the company that you're working for don't value the fact that you can do different things and learn different things, then maybe another company will. But if you sit in one place doing the same thing, I think it's a bit naive to expect that a company is just going to keep giving you more money because why would they? So I think even if you're a specialist, you have to keep growing your capability. If you're in tech, you need to make sure that you're learning about all the new things that are in that space and that you're becoming a better interactor with other people or whatever it is. You can't just be the same person forever and expect to be better rewarded. That's just not going to happen.
So, do you think I think over the last few years, what has become a lot more prominent now is this whole culture of sort of work from home, especially for the people in IT.
Yeah.
And there's so much energy that cannot be communicated if you're just going to be online all the time, right? And then most of the people, may avoid putting up their faces on the video calls, and then, the distance just keeps on increasing. Do you think this will have much more significant impact, let's say, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line? Because I think we came here and we kind of managed to sustain things like COVID because we had that, relationship depth and understanding because people invested while we were working directly with them. Like as a coach, it was almost like being coached while you were on the ground by managers. Whether we like it, their styles or not was a different
Yep.
question. Do you think this will have a different kind of impact as like, how would it unfold, let's say in 5 years, 10 years from now?
I think it has to. Yeah, and I've thought about that a lot because obviously we were lucky in some respects in that you could work from home, but you did it for a specific reason for a specific period of time. So that was helpful, and there were times when it was, great to be able to do something from home rather than wasting 3 hours every day traveling. But it was the exception, not the rule. So what we considered to be completely normal was, bumping into people. For example, if one of you guys were in London, I wouldn't necessarily have known you were coming to London, but
Yeah.
I would bump into you. I'd walk out to the PSG department, and there you'd be. So we could have a chat and we could catch up. All of that sort of random interaction that we took for granted, that erodes over time, and that has value. It's hard to put an absolute value on it, but it definitely has value. And I also think that do people just not feel as engaged about what a company is
Yes.
doing and what their mission is if they're not actually there? I can't see how you could feel as involved, and if you're not as involved, you won't be as effective. So I've got quite strong views on it. I just think it should be the exception, not the rule.
Mm.
And even in our little cricket company, even though people are off doing coaching sessions in different schools, and twice a week, I make sure we get together just for an hour and a half at a local health club, and we have a coffee and we just kind of catch up on what we've done, what we're doing over the next few weeks, and just kind of touch base. Because if it's more for my benefit than anybody else's, because if we didn't have that, I would just feel completely disconnected to everything that was going on, and I just can't see how that makes you effective.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would agree with that. Those interactions that on those coffee machines do help us a lot. I mean, there's just a lot of serendipitous transactions which won't happen. Like you
Yeah,
just meet a lot of people which you never meet online because online is always like, I have to do this task, so I'll ping this person and then speak to him. Otherwise, you no
yeah.
longer have those
It's all
informal
it's all
connections.
planned, isn't it? There's nothing.
Yeah.
And it's also less fun, I would think. I mean, there's so
Yeah.
much comedy that you can have being in a room with people, that you can't replicate that on a Zoom, especially when people are all trying to talk at the same time, or you get those irritating delays when everybody stops and lets the other person go, and it drives me crazy. It has a place, but it can't be. I think if companies make that the normal, they will suffer. And I think high performing organizations are already starting to insist on people having 70, 80% face-to-face time in the office, which I think is you know the right way forward.
Mm.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry.
I think I just one question with you, Mike. I think I put it on there on my agenda as well. It's when I shared with you. So from your perspective, I mean, what is the legacy you want to leave? I mean, you spent a huge amount of career in the corporate world and cricket, and you also followed your passion for music. So how do you think, what's the legacy you want to leave for the next generation?
Yeah, I've thought about that. And I must admit, I haven't come up with a good answer. I mean, I think in cricket, it's to try and make sure I've left something that's kind of well organized that people can continue to play the game. The next generations of youngsters that are coming in, it's easy for them to access. We've tried to do small things around providing equipment for people, and we have a bursary fund for people who find it difficult to pay the fees, so that we can make sure that they are, encouraged to play the game without finance being a barrier. but it's all on a relatively small scale. It's all fairly local, but it's those small improvements, I think, which is a nice thing to leave behind. So, the next person who picks this up from me, and I'll probably only do this for another 2 or 3 years, they should have something that's, reasonably well organized that they can pick up and run with. Whereas a lot of what I did was kind of building it from scratch, really, because the other guys are so busy coaching, they didn't really have time to do any of that. Um,
Yeah.
and from my corporate life, I mean, things like this, um, make me feel pretty good about legacy. The fact that, you guys can reach out 7 years down the line and have a conversation as if we were still working together yesterday, um,
Yeah.
it is a really nice feeling. So yeah, thank you for reaching out to me for a start. But
I think
that's
credit probably goes to you, and thanks to Amit as well, because he kind of connected. I didn't know we were not on Facebook. I think you, Amit, probably are already kind of connected on the Facebook, because I went to China for a couple of years, and you don't have Facebook essentially there unless you're on a VPN or
right. Okay.
something. So, and I resumed back, and then I kind of learned that Amit was, planning to uh, do something on his own. So I thought it's a brilliant time, tap into the opportunity.
But
Uh,
it's a sign that we did good work together, I think, because if we hadn't have all had good memories of working together, then things like this wouldn't happen. So yeah,
yeah.
that's legacy in action, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the framework, especially, I think that was, I think that the learning of for me was quite steep. I mean, a lot of those, especially when I went to China, kind of spending
Okay.
time there and seeing, like the two different ways of doing things, and then, how do we approach it versus, another style, which was also good. But, you could clearly see that, it's until you're physically there, because I think we've been working with Dalian for a long time, but being there for 2 years physically completely changes the perspective. And I think
Yeah.
that's all, goes back to the point you were making earlier, that until you're like face to face with somebody, it's very hard to understand, where they're coming from. How do you
Yeah.
find place to converge and all that kind of stuff. I was speaking to some of the folks, day before yesterday. I was telling them that we're having this conversation, me, Amit, and you, and then I was inviting any questions that I could ask you. And one of the questions that came was, which I thought was interesting, was they said that, uh, with so many competing requirements and dealing with such a complex engagements, where especially when there are so many senior stakeholders involved, how do you deal with escalation? Is there like a go-to strategy, or it's just something you have it in you, to be able to deal with this? So
But when something goes wrong,
yeah. So, the whole thing around escalations, especially when, there's so much, tons on on the ride for, and senior stakeholders are involved and stuff like that. So,
yeah, no, it's a good question. I think um, it's probably something that you learn to get better at as you go. Because you're obviously involved in things that go wrong increasingly through your career. So I think one of the things I tried to do was make sure that the senior stakeholders were um, somebody that you engaged with regularly. So you kind of got to know them a little bit, and you
mm,
had a bit of a relationship with them, so that if you did need to give them some bad news,
mm,
um, you were doing it from a position of having a relationship rather than them only hearing from you when something had gone wrong.
right.
Right.
I've definitely been in that position before, but that's not a good position to be in. But I think one of the questions that got asked earlier was about change, how change programs can work, and how they can work well. One of the key things for me is about the engagement of the senior stakeholders. It's interesting because just a slight aside, but my daughter has started work in a program office, and she's working as sort of a program manager, putting together plans for a company, and the senior stakeholders are nowhere to be seen. And she's only very young in her career, so I'm not getting very involved, but I am just constantly saying, you got to try and find a way of getting them closer, because, we ran projects at Fidelity where things went badly, and it was generally because the person whose name was down as the sponsor was had absolutely no involvement in the program whatsoever. They just happened to be the most senior person in the line of business that the project was being done for. Whereas if you had a project that went well, the person whose name was on it was somebody who was in the program, on a weekly basis at the absolute minimum, preferably more regularly than that. So if you had a problem that needed to be escalated, it shouldn't be a massive surprise to them because they're getting, that regular sort of pulse of information and they care. Whereas I think if they're disconnected and you're giving them bad news, there's no upside in that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And the guys on the FMR, the separation program, were pretty engaged, I found. So that used to work quite well.
Yeah.
You know, if we had a problem, they could normally anticipate it. So that I guess that's my advice is to be close to your senior stakeholders, and if you can't get them close, they're probably not the right stakeholders.
Hmm. Right. Right. So for you personally, looking down the road, are there any sort of big moves on the horizon? It's more
Um,
cricket, more music.
it's definitely cricket. Yeah, that seems to be. I mean, it's probably more travel is something we'd like to do a bit more of. Our youngest is in his last year at school. So once he goes off to, well, initially to Australia and then to university, it kind of gives us a bit more freedom. So yeah, there are parts of the world, including your part of the world, that we want to spend more time in. And I've just got involved with a cricket charity as a trustee, it's a voluntary role, but it's something that I'm enjoying, and I think I could probably give more time to. They specialise in providing cricket equipment to underprivileged parts of the world, and they've already done quite a few kit drops into Afghanistan and Rwanda and places like this that are playing cricket, um, where the barrier to entry around equipment is quite high. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'd like to get more involved in that. And I think for the next sort of 2 or 3 years, that's something that could be quite enjoyable.
So just purely, so pardon my ignorance here, Mike, but in for cricket coaching, how does the selection or the entry for youngsters, how does that work? Like, for example, something equivalent of recruitment out here, and how does that work
Yep.
for on this side of the things?
So we have two different journeys really through our coaching program. We have open sessions and open courses that literally anyone who wants to play cricket can come to, and we make them pretty basic and we try and make them fun. They do lots of games, lots of participation, lots of running around, and in the school holidays we do a lot of that kind of work. But then we also have representative cricket, where we hold trials every September,
Hmm.
for each age group for the areas that we're responsible for, and we pick a squad of around 20 kids.
Mm.
And then we train those kids all winter, and then they play in tournaments in the summer. So, and we do get children that move between. If someone comes to us through an open course, but they've obviously got ability and they're willing to work hard, we can move them across into the representative side.
So for
So
the
we do
representative
both.
side, is this purely on the basis of their like technical ability to play, or is this like a more elaborate selection process in terms of their soft skills or maybe their attitude? What goes in selecting someone?
That's a good question. It changes as we go through the age group. So I think, if you're looking at a group of 10-year-olds, a lot of it is just about how do they hold the bat, how cleanly can they hit the ball, can they bowl with a straight arm, are they somewhat athletic? So we're making pretty basic decisions at that age. And then by the time they're 15, 16, all those other things that you just mentioned come into play. The strongest players are the ones that have shown the ability to learn and absorb new information, interact well with their teammates and their coaches. And one of the things I wanted to mention actually about cricket, which I think one of the questions was, learnings from cricket. Um, Somebody said to me a little while ago that certainly when you think about cricket from a batsman's point of view, it's a game of failure. If you can't learn to fail in cricket, particularly as a batter, you're going to have a massive problem because it's only a question of the time between the failure. That's the variable. Whether you manage to get 30 runs, 50 runs, 80 runs, 100 runs, you're still going to get out. Um, And some weeks you might get out for no runs, but you have to be able to go in the next time and approach the game in the same way. And you don't really experience that in business, but it's something that you've got to be pretty mentally tough. I think some of these guys like Virat Kohli and people who've scored tens of thousands of runs have failed hundreds of times, and it's a big thing that people have to get into their heads.
So this whole mental aspect, I mean, is it something you think coaches can work on, or is it something inborn? I mean, it could be relevant for cricket, could be relevant for other areas as well. This whole mental aspect of a person to be strong enough. Do you think you can actually build that, or it can be coached, or it's inborn?
I think it's definitely coachable, um, but I think there's a base level of resilience that if you don't have it, you're going to find it very difficult. When we go back round to where we started talking about Gen Z and um, I think resilience is a key factor because I was chatting to Rob Middleton the last time I met him, and he's running the graduate entry program at the company that he now works for, and he said that sometimes he feels like he's the first person that's given these guys bad news, and they're 23, 24 years old, and he's the first person who's told them they're not perfect. Um, and that's a problem, so I think we have to be better at that as parents, and we also have to allow our schools and other people that are involved in early education to give people bad news because you don't want to be finding out when you're 23 that you're not perfect. You
Yeah.
need to have got some resilience in before then.
Yeah. That's quite interesting.
Do you see the same thing in the job market out there?
I think, especially with the young ones, I think you're absolutely right that. So, for example, I started my career in a consulting company. Sometimes you would go to work on Monday and come back on Wednesday. You would just sleep in the office under the desk,
Yep.
or you get up in the morning, do your work, and like it's literally like that. And these days, people are not I think there's too much pressure, things like, the work-life balance, what's my role? This is, I think we become a little bit more straitjacketed in terms of what the role definitions are.
Yep.
And early on, that was not the case, right? I remember in my second job, I was working on a project, it got delayed by 3 weeks. So there was like so there was a meeting to assess what went wrong. And they asked me why was it wrong? I said I was working on this technology for the first time. It took me a couple of weeks to put my head around what I was doing. And they said that, why didn't you say that, this is not your role? And I was coming from a consulting company. I said, I didn't know I could say that. I
Yeah.
thought you just do it. Right? So you're told just do it. So I think we see that a lot now. I think there's this like, it's almost like they're coming out of a perfect simulation,
Yeah.
which is not representative of the real world that they're being thrown at. So, every now and then they would want to change because, they can't get along with the manager, or, it's something
Sure.
else, which is all a lot of times look like, these kind of explanations or justifications with lack of persistence, stay with that pressure, as you're saying. I think you put it brilliantly, saying that, somebody has to tell them early on, how to accept the failure, how do you sustain, under pressure and things like that. So I think
Yeah.
that definitely is the case in many cases here.
I think there's a lot of good that's coming out of the individual being more important in an organization. And that's a lot of what we've talked about the new generation. I think a lot of that is behind it, that people are being a bit more selfish about, what's in it for them and
Yeah.
where do they want to work from and how many hours do they want to work and how many days holiday do they want. I think whereas in my day, you just didn't really get involved in conversations like that. If something needed doing, you just got on with it because doing something else would have been unhelpful.
Yes.
Uh, and maybe that went too far, and organizations were taking that for granted, and that's not good either. So I can see that there needs to be some sort of maybe correction, and that people do need to feel more empowered in an organization. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if it goes too far, there'll obviously be consequences.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's true. Interesting. So, Mike, what's your next When are you targeting next to be in India?
I would hope to be back out there within the next 2 years, and we want to come. My wife's not been to India, so
Oh, okay.
um, we want to do a proper trip where it's not about work and it's not about cricket. Um, well, it might be a little bit about cricket, but it. um,
India, you'll find cricket everywhere. So
We'll
yeah,
edit
like,
this
don't.
part.
yeah,
We'll edit this part from the video so that your secret ambition is not gone.
we should probably go and we should do some proper tourist things. I've been to Delhi probably 10 times, and never been to Agra, never been to Jaipur.
You've
You
not
know,
seen the famous Taj Mahal. That's the
I
first
don't,
place where everybody lands.
no, I've never been. I've really spent a lot of time, in the office and the Westin Hotel,
So
um,
I think
and then at cricket stadium. So
more than Agra and Jaipur, I think it would be good if we can plan for southern parts of India or the eastern part of India,
Yeah.
northeast especially.
yeah,
The northeastern part of India is beautiful. That is where my son is studying now.
okay,
So that's beautiful. It's simply, I mean, the Delhi and its surrounding areas have become too concretized, the way I call it, too
yeah,
many buildings. As you move away, and where Ashutosh's hometown is. I mean,
Yeah,
these are the
that's where
kind of
you
places.
visited. So next time you're here, you're our guest. Let us know. I don't know if you tried the
very kind.
famous Himachali cuisine. It's called tham. It's a multi-course meal. I don't know if you tried that when you were trekking in uh, Dharamshala.
We ended up eating quite a lot of would it have been Tibetan food, I think.
Yes.
We
Okay.
tried everything. Yeah, we're reasonably adventurous. Because I guess a few of us have been to India a number of times, so we felt quite confident. And no, we had some great food, and we were very well looked after. No, we had good fun. So no, we'll definitely be back out at some point. We have also got a number of other places that we want to try and tick off over the next few years, but India's definitely on the list.
Yeah, so
Great.
do let us know when you're here. So
Yeah.
probably we can also
Certainly
catch
will.
up.
I think sometime me and Amit might be there in London, so we are working on a few things. So if you're there, maybe we'll try and find some opportunity if you're there as well.
Yeah, let me know when you're in town. Yeah, I mean it's still pretty easy for me to get to London if I'm not committed to anything else. I still go up there a couple of times a week.
Right, right.
Okay.
Cool.
Anything
Well,
else?
Mike, thank you so much. I think this was brilliant, and I think connecting after so many years was just fantastic. I think clearly there's so much to that I think as I was mentioning earlier, every time we would meet, like the few people will always talk about, and I think it was hardly ever about the work or the projects. That's something that we kind of realized, but now when we meet, we don't talk about what projects we did. Like it's more like what kind of people were we working with, more
Yeah.
on so I think that's quite inspiring. So thank you very much for taking time out. I think we'll hope to maybe do more conversations, see you in person, as and when we get the opportunity. Um,
No, thanks again for reaching out, and I'm really pleased to see you both and see that you're both doing well and life's treating you well. So
Yeah,
take
sure.
care.
Thanks, Mike.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Mike. Have a good
Speak
day.
soon.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks a
Bye.
lot. Bye.